Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, January 18th, 2023, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the questions we've been hearing from international educators over the past 7 days. Before we get into those three questions, I want to give a special shout out to those watching live on one of our SMIE Consulting social channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. Grateful that you're here live for the conversation today. For those that are not and are watching on repeats, either on of those platforms or by downloading our podcast, subscribing to the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup on your favorite podcast provider. We're grateful that you're here for the journey. And as we do each week, we take the stories and the themes that we cover here in our questions from our SMIE Consulting e-newsletter. That comes out Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I'm dropping the links to the website where you can subscribe for smieconsulting.org/subscribe. I'll also be putting the email version of the newsletter, the most recent edition of the newsletter, in the chat, as well as the LinkedIn version. And between the email version and the LinkedIn version, we are closing in rapidly on 1,000 subscribers for the SMIE Consulting e-news. All the SMIE news fit to share. So we take those news stories that would come out on Monday morning. You get those direct in your inbox free of charge. And then we develop some themes around some of the common articles that we see popping up. And each week on Wednesdays, we go into questions surrounding some of those common articles and go a little bit deeper and talk about how they might impact what we do in international education, how that might affect our strategy, might put an idea in our heads about a new market we need to look at or a new strategy we need to engage in as part of our recruitment efforts. So that's why we're here, and we'll get straight into our first question of the day, which is one that's been getting a lot of eyeballs over the last few weeks in higher education, in society in general. And that is, how will ChatGPT affect international education? Now, for those not familiar, ChatGPT is a new AI product, and I'm going to be dropping in three links to stories. One of which that we'll start with from the pie has kind of an international ed perspective. There's also been several articles in higher ed journals and business journals about the impact ChatGPT might have on the education system, from both the academic side in the classroom, what that's going to mean in higher education circles, what can ChatGPT actually do, and how can teachers identify what's coming from an AI source like a ChatGPT versus a student's actual authentic work. And also an article from Jim Jump. He's a legendary admissions commentator in the United States, and he's also got some very specific concerns or potential discussion points related to ChatGPT and the college essay. And we could also extend that to statement of purposes for graduate department programs. So all of these are ones that you want to pay attention to as we go through the discussion here. But one thing I just for talking points, I'm thinking, okay, ChatGPT, we're going to be talking about how this will affect international education. We can talk about if you require, like Jim Jump uses his example in his Inside Higher Ed piece about the college essay. If you have the Common App prompts, for example, if you put those out there and then ask ChatGPT to generate an essay that contains certain things, you give them topics that you want to have covered, what will that generate? And would an admissions officer be able to distinguish a ChatGPT generated essay versus one that's actually from the student themselves? So this is something that we're going to be dealing with in higher education. But before I get into it, I did want to share a story in terms of what ChatGPT suggested as talking points for today's session, as an example of what it can do. And we'll get some feedback from the audience to see what you think about how legitimate it is. I haven't looked at those talking points yet, so I'm going to get through my piece on what I would talk about related to international education first. But when you look at I'll share a story I learned from, happens to be from a prominent Catholic high school in St. Louis County. There was a cheating scandal last semester in the late part of the fall, where an English teacher had issued an assignment for essays to the class, and those came in. Then grades were given, and then there was a tip-off that don't know who it was from, but it would tip off to the teacher and then to the administration that students had used, an unnamed number of students had used an AI source tool to create their answers for their essays, or to create their essays. And that's one of the beautiful things about, well, if you consider it beautiful, one of the intriguing things about what ChatGPT can do. If you want it to write an essay, if you wanted to give talking points, if you wanted to give a summary of a certain topic, it would be able to do that very easily based on the available sources of information on the web anywhere in the world. And they can do it very rapidly. And I'll share the results of my experiment here to talk about the impact of ChatGPT on international ed in just a minute. But going back to this high school story, the students that were this is a prominent high school where the tuition amounts each year are well into the 20,000s, if not higher, per year for high school. That those students, there was about 40% of the class were determined to have used this AI service to create their essays that they turned in, and those percentage of the class that turned them in using this service were obviously failed that essay or that assignment. And then the school had indicated they were going to be putting a mark on their permanent transcripts that would then go to colleges when they apply in the next year or two, and to noting that they had used they were found to have cheated, documented that they had used an AI generator to create their essays that they turned in. And the thought was that this is just the beginning. What had happened was the school, when they found out that this particular service had been used, they employed some AI scanning counter tool to the ChatGPT to find out what were the markers of were the essays that they submitted. How did they find out they were fraudulent? They used another tool to find out whether that information could have been generated by an AI generator. So, interestingly, my prediction is that school is going to see huge increase in scholarships to the institution for financial aid. It's the high school, remember, private Catholic high school. Huge increases in scholarships from the families of these students that have cheated and gotten their grades adjusted and gotten these failing marks, and now are getting will have something permanent on their record. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and how other universities, other high schools utilize anti-AI tools to try and find out whether, and maybe many of us do, professors have their ways of finding out if essays that are submitted or papers that are submitted have been plagiarized or are plagiarizing someone else. That kind of tool is going to apply to essays and papers, I would think, from here on out. The smart institutions will certainly find those tools to counter what ChatGPT can do. Now, the question is everything that ChatGPT produces evil? Clearly not. It's an AI. It's AI. It's not self-aware yet, I don't think. But we'll go to my experiment where I asked, write some talking points about the impact of ChatGPT on international education. And largely, these tools are positive. These recommendations, there were 7 that came up through when I inputted that question or that task to ChatGPT. First up, ChatGPT can help improve language learning by providing an interactive and personalized experience for students. So there's that potential there. So let's focus on somewhat of the positives. It can also assist with cultural understanding by providing information and insights about different countries and cultures. Awesome. can apply for study abroad as well as newly arriving international students. ChatGPT can be integrated into virtual classrooms, allowing for more efficient and effective communication between teachers and students in international education settings. Good point. And it can also be used as a tool for online tutoring and language practice, helping students to improve their language skill. That certainly makes sense. It can be the ability of ChatGPT to understand and respond to natural language input makes it an ideal tool for helping non-native speakers navigate complex academic content in a foreign language. So potential benefits for your newly arrived international students whose English proficiency scores might be good, but they might need a little extra help in terms of understanding the content in the classroom. So that's a very valuable tool. And finally, ChatGPT can help to bridge the digital divide and provide access to education to students in remote or underprivileged areas. So all fantastically laudable goals of talking points about how ChatGPT can potentially impact international education positively. So I'm going to keep this because this is something that I think will be something I'm certainly going to refer back to. I'll be sharing some of this probably in an upcoming post, just to share what that experiment produced. But certainly there's a lot in here about ChatGPT from these 3 articles. And if you haven't already, you can create a free account on ChatGPT to be able to utilize what the service can do for you. Might help you in some of these areas that you're seeing in this recommendation list there, talking points of the impact of ChatGPT on international education. So the question, talking points weren't written to be negative. So if I put something in there, how will ChatGPT hurt international education or international student recruitment? So I could do with something like that. So you can modify this as you wish, but this is really something that I think there's potential. I think the positives can outweigh the negatives if it's used correctly and used as a force for good. But for institutions that need to protect themselves to make sure the grades they are providing are what the students deserve, then certainly there's going to be some need for some due diligence and equipping yourself and your institution with tools to counter some of the potential negative impacts of ChatGPT on what you hope to achieve in your institution. So that's a good first question. Great start. But let's move on to our second one of the day, and that is, what is an international student parent strategy? Now, my goodness, this for many of my friends in the business who are in one-person operations or very small offices that don't have bandwidth, this is a dream. To have a strategy to attract and influence the parents of the students that you're recruiting is something we all wish we could probably do in an ideal world, and it probably comes down to bandwidth in your office, staff time, potential funding that you need to do certain things related to make this a truly effective tool. But let's chat for a little bit about what this looks like. So 2 good friends of mine that I've worked with in the past, one with Education USA and one in the consulting world, have recently done an article for the NAFSA International Educator magazine that's just come out, dropping the link to that in the chat. So if you aren't a NAFSA subscriber, unfortunately, you won't be able to see that article beyond the headline and the intro paragraph. But what I found when it comes to parent strategies, it's probably the part of the international student recruitment process that everybody wishes they could have well developed, but it's the part that probably gets the least attention paid to it because it is a next level of work in terms of building potentially a comm flow for those parents. How do you get their information as part of the process? And for the most part, when we talk parent strategies, we're talking about undergraduate recruitment of international students. But the article itself is by Jackie Castine and of Jackfruit Marketing and Marigold Holmes, who had been until recently at Oregon State for a number of years, and a good friend used to work with her in Education USA. Jackie, I've worked with her on a couple different consulting projects over the years, some years ago, but certainly she is a frequent conference speaker, well educated on international ed issues, and she and Marigold have put together a really fantastic article here that I think can serve as a real template for those that are trying to develop an international parent strategy for their undergraduate admissions recruitment efforts. Now, some of the highlighted parts here that Jackie and Marigold take a look at is that first, it's going to the root of why that particular student is looking abroad. Not just necessarily only at the United States, could be looking at many countries as part of their overall options that they're considering. So depending on what those families' drivers are, it could be quality, it could be price, it could be location, it could be a variety of other factors that parents and the students are considering. And they may come at it from very different starting points in terms of what the main motivators are. Students might be looking for where they might have some friends from their high school or their neighborhood that are going to university if they're going abroad. It's the reason for going abroad. Maybe the options at home aren't the best, or access is limited to students who aren't at the top of the academic food chain. So those are the drivers of what that institutions need to have a look at when they are thinking about what kind of content do parents want to see. And knowing that it's not going to be universally the same wherever you go, but knowing that every parent, if they had an option, would probably want to see a scholarship of some sort for their son or daughter. Some out of absolute necessity, that there's no way they can afford an undergraduate education in the United States without some financial help. Or to others that might only want that because it's going to be a feather in their cap when they're on the cocktail party circuit with their friends and colleagues from work. So there are a lot of different motivations out there, but you can boil them down to a few key ones. Financial is going to be one, depending on the individual family circumstances, what level of importance that'll take. It can be quality and rankings; those tend to rise above, particularly from parents that might not have any other ideas on how they can assess universities in the United States, because there are so many and there is no official ranking in the United States of U.S. institutions. So we have to be cognizant that those rankings that are out there are what is the only thing that they have to go on if they don't know any better. Or have had experiences in the United States themselves. So that's all part of the process, is identifying those individual family motivations. And that's what are some of those drivers, and that Jackie and Marigold identify decision-making drivers here as the big whys for going abroad. After those big whys, the mobility drivers, they talk about the decision-making drivers. So what's first making them look abroad, and then what are the individual decisions coming down to? Is it going to be academic quality? Is it going to be value of investment and career outcomes? And you got goodness knows those have been rising up the ranks in priority, ROI type of questions. Is it the student support that their son or daughter is going to have when they're overseas in a foreign country, having the prime formative years of their education, finally as they grow into adulthood, what that looks like, making sure they have the right support, making sure their son or daughter is safe, that accessibility and cost of healthcare, pandemic protocols, all of these other things, environmental safety, crime, weather safety, as we've talked about on this channel before, what safety means to those parents, the location of the campus, and the experience in that city, in that state, in the country. They want to know all the various factors that might impact their son or daughter when they're studying abroad. And the likelihood of admissions, and that, whether you like it or not, that has a factor on where if they just will decide to apply. Are they going to play it safe and just apply to the ones that they think they have a chance of getting into? Are they only going to apply to the name schools, whatever it might be that they've heard of? So these are all the decision-making drivers that they've identified. So do you have talking points in your marketing materials that you might have for students that you can adapt for a parent audience? So certainly useful discussions there. And then next step is really having understanding how that decision process is facilitated. And as the article points out quite clearly, students are often considering options in 2, 3, sometimes 6 different countries as to where they might study. So it's no longer just at home or abroad. It's at home or it's not at home, but maybe 5 or 6 countries overseas that might be an option for students. And as their parents try and understand the incredible complexities from one country to the next and answer all those kind of driver questions. So it's really looking at, for example, the article highlights, if you're looking at like 2 countries in Europe, Netherlands and Ireland, you would want to, if you're an institution in Ireland competing with a student who's applying to Dutch universities as well, who have recently been told, as we've talked about in weeks past, and in the newsletter talked about that last week, that there are the universities in the Netherlands are being told, don't recruit more international students. We don't have housing for them. So if you're an Irish school that does have adequate housing for international students, that's what you want to be focusing on. If you know that that's going to be a qualitative difference and a quantitative difference for students that might be applying to you, who might also be applying to a country where housing issues are really a major concern right now. So that's an example of understanding that decision process, what goes into it. And in the end, it's to our benefits as institutions when we're recruiting students that we should be leveraging, as the article, last closing section of it, focuses on, leveraging the power of parents as influencers. Influencers is a word we talk about in recruitment oftentimes as who are the influencers, social media influencers that we need to be working with to help us recruit students. Sometimes it's your current students if they've got a big social media following. Other times it's people who are alumni of your institution that you want to work with to help promote your school to students. But the parents, as in the end, the primary influencers, because they're the ones going to be paying the bills most likely, that these are the relationships you as an institution, when you have an opportunity to work with them directly and have chats for incoming students, parents, on what your options are for on-campus arrival. If you have a separate parent orientation for those that have large enough numbers where you might have a large enough or a cohort of parents that will be accompanying your undergraduate internationals when they come for orientation, do you have something separate for them? Because that's always making them feel more a part of the process and more engaged and valued. And those institutions that do that best are the ones that can tick all these boxes in terms of having content for them, direct communications with them, having events for them, all the way through the recruitment cycle, even into the time that they're enrolled. Obviously, when they get on campus and the reality, and having a session during a separate parent orientation on FERPA and what that means and what they can and can't get about their sons and daughters, that would be a fantastic prep session. They won't like it, but that's a session they need to hear about in terms of what those restrictions are. So when you can address those questions and concerns that they have, then you're doing yourself and your institution a world of good. Now, that's a great segue for our last question of the week, which is, why is everybody talking about housing these days? And this is the article is fairly innocuous, but it's from Canada, from Ontario, Canada, out of the Pine News, that in Canada now there is the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, it's a provincial agency, has said that international students are facing challenges finding affordable housing, maintaining their mental health, and understanding Canadian academic culture. So they've identified that as an urgent need for colleges and governments. This is the report findings, that there's an urgent need for colleges and governments in Canada, provincial governments, to take responsibility for improving international student well-being. So that takes a lot of shapes and forms, but my focus here is on housing. Now, housing has become a critical issue in the last 2 years. The pandemic really highlighted a lot of these issues, not just in Canada. Certainly it's happened in the UK, it's happened in the Netherlands, as we've just talked about with the last section, or the last topic on parents. And we've talked about what's happening in Australia, where you have the province of Western Australia, the state of Western Australia, is now paying citizens of Western Australia to house international students because simply they have a huge shortage. And with the rushes coming back in after the pandemic, particularly from India, they need, these new students coming in need housing. And most of the campuses it's limited to what might be available on campus. Most people are looking for housing in the neighborhoods around the campuses. So in Western Australia, they're paying people to house international students. In Ontario, they've identified housing as a key issue. Cape Breton University is turning away students because they don't have the capacity to house them anymore. I know on my campus, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, we're transitioning back from a pandemic-style situation when we reopened in the fall of 20. We had a limited number of students who were on campus, and then into 21. But we had gone from doubles in our housing to all singles. But we didn't convert them all back in time for fall of 22. So that led to, we had a little bit of a shock, not a huge one, but it's a sign of things to come as we continue to grow at UNLV with the more international students we have coming. We didn't have adequate housing for all of the new international students as they arrived, and a lot of it's down to our communication in terms of making sure we're doing a better job of informing incoming students of what their options are early enough, and with enough regularity of emphasizing the importance of housing before they arrive, getting that sorted before they arrive so that they can move right in, ideally. And making sure those communication lines are open and that's communicated effectively. So there's a lot of internal things we're dealing with because we know we're going to grow. We're in growth mode. We know we're going to have considerably more international students this fall than we did last fall. So housing will become a critical issue for us if we grow our international population too fast. So there's a lot of levers that need to be moved, and campuses do not turn on a dime when it comes to buying properties and renovating properties. These need to be planned out over time. So what are short-term fixes? What are other options for housing that we can maybe look at working with other private providers? So housing is going to be a critical issue for us at our campus, and there are numbers of other college campuses that are dealing with these pressures in terms of housing. For example, in the UK, they were, and in Scotland in particular, students were being told this past fall, don't come if you don't already have a place. That's basically what the Dutch are saying. If you don't have a place, you're not coming. Even if you wanted to, we're not going to let you come because we simply don't have adequate housing. And that's something that you think about it more and more when what Ontario has said, that it's a responsibility of the universities and the local governments to work together to try and find solutions for these housing challenges. So it's a much broader picture than just international student recruitment, getting them in the door. You need to be looking holistically about the experience that those students are having. If there are a critical mass of students that come to your campus who didn't get housing, who didn't know about it, or realize that they're too late, that there weren't any options available for them, what happens when those students have a horrible first few weeks and then go home and tell their friends? It's not going to end well for you. So if you're not addressing these housing issues in terms of your planning and the scope of what you're trying to do for your institution, if those aren't being accounted for in some way, shape, or form, then there's potential negative blowback that can come and really make your day really a poor one in the end. When those students come back and say, hey, this isn't the place for me, I got to go. A lot of it comes down to communication. A lot of it comes down to not only with communication with students, but longer term planning and communication with campus constituents that are integrally involved in this process in terms of making the information available about what those options are. And if they're not on campus, what are the other options? And I know there are some campuses, ours included, that can't recommend individual landlords that are outside of our university sphere. What do you do? How do you make those options available? Or how can we find those local landlords that we can maybe, though we can't officially vet them, and you can maybe gather a rating scale that us students can develop for that live in these other apartments and other housing options, because that's something that you need something to provide a complete picture for students before they arrive about where they're going to live, because that's bedrock to their comfort level, their adaptation ability to your campus is how well they get settled in housing. And then those around them and everything else that goes into that mix. So that's what we have for you today on some of these important topics that we've discussed and how interconnected they all can be. So we look forward to chatting with you again in the next week or so. We'll look forward to bringing some more content to you on these important international ed topics. So until next time, have a wonderful day. Cheers.